Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli here. Welcome to a brand new edition of In the Shop. And I've got a good one for you today. Get a lot of questions that come through our channel asking about how to pick the right rod. Specifically, how to pick the right action of rod. What does that mean, rod action? And how do you pick the right one? Well, we're going to flush it out today in this In the Shop. Before we get into action, which is something I really want to talk about, let's start with rod type real quick. And, you know, looking at the two different types of rods, right? Are you going to pick a casting rod? This is a bait cast rod with a reel with a round spool, right? A casting reel. Or are you going to pick a spinning reel? Some people call it open face, but it's a spinning reel. Okay, with a bail. Which one of these two are you going to pick? So generally, here's my rule on spinning versus casting. When you're using lighter lures and smaller baits, lighter lures, smaller lures, they're better suited for spinning. Okay? Lighter lures, smaller baits, way better suited for spinning. The weight number I like to use is 1/4 ounce. If something weighs 1/4 ounce or lighter, I tend to throw it on a spinning, okay? The opposite is true with casting. If something's bigger, heavier, and larger, right? My larger lures, my heavier lures, I tend to throw it on a casting rod. So that same weight spectrum is flip-flopped. If it weighs 1/4 ounce or more, heavier than 1/4 ounce, right? If it's 5/16, 3/8, half ounce, 3/4, 1 ounce, I tend to throw it on a casting rod. Also true for larger lures. I tend to throw it on a casting rod. These both have features and benefits. But lighter, smaller lures spinning, heavier, larger lures casting, that's a good rule of thumb. Listen to me, before I get on to action, use what you're confident in. You could certainly cast large, heavy lures on a spinning, and you could certainly cast small, light lures on a casting rod. So use what you're comfortable with. All right, now that rod type, reel type is out of the way, let's talk about action. This is a topic that has been discussed many different ways over the years, and I'm going to try to talk to you about it in the most general terms, okay? And we'll look at casting and spinning for you, but let's start with casting. Rods are broken down by action, by weight, by length. That's how they're often spec'd on the rod. You're looking right now at an Abu Garcia Ike series rod. And if you look at our rods, they all have a model number. They have a length of the rod. This happens to be a 7-foot medium power rod, which is graphite, 7-foot medium. And then they have a lure weight classification. This one, remember what I said about casting? This one is 1/4 ounce to 3/4 ounce, okay? A lot of these rods also will give you line specs, and we do on the Ike series as well. This one says 10 to 17 pound line. These are great specs because they put you in the ballpark. But I want to get you thinking in terms of rod action or tip of the rod, okay? Tip of the rod. And different manufacturers spec their rods differently. So Abu versus Daiwa versus Shimano versus Luz, they're all speccing their rods a little different. So I want you to start thinking in terms of action, which equates to that rod bend, that tip of the rod, okay? So right here we've got, this is a medium action rod by Abu Garcia. It's in their Power Series, which is a graphite rod. And when I put a load on the rod, and the best way to do this, if you're shopping at a retail store, is to actually thread line through and grab the line and see how it feels. But you could also just do it with your hand, right? If you look at this tip, I want you to look at it. As I put a load on that tip, I want you to see the point at which it stops flexing. I can see it right now, but I want you to look. Let's count from the tip down. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so my 6th guide, look at that. I see bend. From my tip to my 6th guide down, I see a tip. But starting at about my 7th guide, look at that. There's no tip. It starts to get stiff. And it starts to become what I call backbone or ass of the rod, right? The backbone of the rod. So this is a medium action, 7-foot medium action graphite rod. And if you look at that ratio, because we're at about the 6th guide up, between the 6th and 7th guide up, about 35–40% of that rod is tippy. But guess what? About 60 to 65% of that rod is backbone. Look, there's no flex there, right? So let's start thinking about action in terms of that flex, right? I'm going to grab a heavy action rod and show you the comparison. This is read this spec for you to put you in the ballpark. This is an Abu Garcia Ike Series 8-foot heavy power rod. This is a flipping rod, big swim bait rod, big giant weight rod, punching mats, right? The spec on this one is 8-foot heavy, ½ ounce to 2 ounces. You can punch a 2-ounce weight, 15 to 30 pound tests. Heavy, heavy line, and even higher on braid, right? Because think about that line size equivalent in braid, diameter equivalent. So this thing is, dude, this is a heavy action rod. Now let's look at that same comparison, right? Let's go to that tip. Let's put a load on it. Be better with line, grabbing the line, but watch this. Look at that. Oh my gosh, look at that. There's hardly no tip. I'm going to go right now, and now I'm about between my 3rd and my 4th guide. There's a little tip there, which you still want in a heavy action rod. You want a little tip. But now, from that 4th guide all the way down, remember, 8 feet, ready? Look at that. All the way down to the end, all the way down is stiff. It's butt of the rod. It's power, right? So heavy action. Now our ratio changes. Goes from 60-40, 70-30 in that range. It goes to 80-20, 90-10, right? 80% butt, 20% tip. Right? Heavy action, okay? But again, different rods, different specs. Think about it in terms of the flex of that rod. All right? Let's switch over to spinning so I can show you, I want to show you medium light in spinning. The same thing we're using for casting, we can carry over to spinning, okay? So now let's see here. I want to pick the right one for you. Now we're going to look at a medium light rod. This happens to be, if we look at our specs, this is an Abu Garcia Finesse Spinning 7.4 medium light. Medium light. Now our weight ratio, listen to this, 3/32 of an ounce up to 3/8 of an ounce. That's even on the heavy side, right? So this rod's built for lighter weights. And listen to my line spec. 4 to 10 pound line. It's putting you in the ballpark. But ultimately, I want you to once again look at that tip. Look at the load. Watch that tip. And here it goes. Look at this. Look how much now. Now we're on a medium light spinning rod. Look at this. Oh my gosh, look at this. Almost half the rod is bending. Look at this. So now this ratio is almost like 50-50, okay? Let's count the guides. Look at it. I see it bending to about right there, which happens to be the halfway point of the rod. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sixth and seventh guide is where we start seeing that flex end, that tip end, the softness end, and the backbone pick up. Half of the rod, 50-50, right? And very indicative of a more medium light action, which is what we want for little, smaller baits, lighter line. We want more of that medium action, that softer tip, right? This is a medium light, a medium. Keep knocking it off there. Think about that tip and how important it is, okay? All right, there's a good description on picking action based on that tip of the rod. The lighter the action, smaller baits, little or smaller hooks. Techniques where you don't need a giant hook set, medium light, medium action. As you get to bigger baits and bigger hooks, lures where you've got to jack that hook. Look at that big 4 or 5/0 VMC, extra heavy gauge flipping hook. I got to jack that fish. Medium heavy, heavy action. Bigger baits, heavier hooks. Harder hook set, heavier action. Okay? I hope this is making sense to you. The last thing I want to talk about real quick is material of rod in choosing a rod. And, you know, basically you have 3 choices. You have graphite, you have composite, and you have fiberglass. Okay? Fiberglass on the extreme right end, graphite on the left end, composite in the middle, because a composite rod has graphite and glass mixed together. For most of my fishing, including single hook applications, we're talking about shaky head, wacky rig, single hook applications, big jig, a big spinnerbait, a chatterbait, a swim jig, single hook applications, bigger hooks. For all those applications, I love graphite. I'm using graphite about 65–70% of my rods. I'm using graphite, okay? Fiberglass, to me, is way too soft from the tip to the butt. It's soft throughout, so I don't use fiberglass. But composite rods, and I wanted to save this for last, there is a place in my fishing for composite rods. This is about 30 or 35% of my rods are composite. This is a graphite and glass rod mixed together. And in our Abu Garcia Ike series rods, we call these rods delay rods. And composite rods, because it's a mix of glass and graphite combined, they're a lot softer. That same softness I talked about happens a lot quicker, easier at the tip. But look, the delay rods still have backbone, right? This is a medium action, 7-foot delay rod. Put the load on it. Look, we've got a bend to about here, a little more than halfway. So there it goes, medium action, just like we talked about, right? It's about the 7th guide down, but it's softer throughout. Still has that backbone. Look, there's no flex here, but it's a softer tip throughout. Composite material with that glass in the graphite mixed, going to give you a softer action. And guess what composite rods are good for? Right there. I'm talking about treble hooked baits is where I primarily use my composite rods. Crankbaits, jerk baits, top waters, rip baits, things with treble hooks on them. I like a composite rod because it's a little softer and adds a little bit of delay. That's why we call them a delay rod. The fish will get the bait in his mouth before you rip it away from him. It'll add a little delay to that hook set. And with those treble hooks, you want that softer tip. to give as you're fighting the fish. You're going to land a lot more of them. The other thing it does, lets you cast those lighter crankbaits a mile because you can load those composite rods a little better, okay? So, man, we talked about a lot. Doing this in the shop on how to pick the right rod. We talked about spinning versus casting. In general, lighter lures, smaller baits, spinning, more finesse applications. 1/4 ounce or less, use a spinning. 1/4 ounce or heavier, bigger lures, heavier lures, big single hooked, heavy hooked baits. Go to your casting rods, right? Go to your casting rods. We talked about thinking about the tip, the action in terms of the bend of the rod, okay? Across the board, if you're using different manufacturers, that's a way to make sure you're picking the right rod for the right bait, okay? And then finally, we talked about rod composition, graphite versus composite versus fiberglass. Use these things when you're thinking about purchasing a rod. If you're out at your retailer, you're feeling a rod, you're testing it out, use those tips on picking the right action for the right technique. I promise you, you're going to hook and land more fish if you got the right action and the right kind of rod. Man, I hope you enjoyed this in the shop talking about picking rods and rod action. If you liked it, do me a favor real quick. Take a brief second, hit that subscribe button down there. I'm going to have more great stuff coming to you every week. If you're already subscribed, tell your fishing friend to subscribe to the Mike Iaconelli Fishing YouTube channel. They're going to love it. Good luck, good fishing. We'll see you in the next one.